The moment my husband said his friends believed I was too ordinary, too small, too forgettable, something inside me snapped, quietly, brutally, like a woman finally done apologizing for breathing. I am Lorraine Vale, 54 years old, and until that morning, I thought I understood the shape of my marriage. I thought I knew the weight of devotion, the meaning of partnership, the cost of compromise. But dawn has a cruel way of revealing what darkness lets us ignore, and that September sunrise exposed a truth I had been refusing to face. My husband, Rylan, stood at the foot of our bed, folding shirts with the rigid precision of a man preparing for battle. The suitcase on the hardwood floor gaped like a silent witness. Outside, the neighborhood was still half asleep, sprinklers humming, a distant dog barking, someone's early coffee grinder whining. But inside our bedroom, everything had fallen unbearably still. He didn't look at me when he said it. That was the first wound of the day. I need space, Lorraine, he muttered. My friends think, well, they think I settled. That you don't exactly push me to level up. Level up. Like marriage was a video game. Like I was a tutorial character he'd outgrown. I pulled the blanket around my waist and sat upright, my pulse thudding unevenly. And you agree with them? His sigh was long, almost pitiful, as if I were the one letting him down. They just think you're comfortable. You don't really strive for anything. You stay home. You're stable, but not remarkable. They worry I'm limiting myself. Limiting himself. A man who never once asked about my work suddenly believed he was the only dreamer in the room. Rylan had always loved talking, his job, his projects, his next big move. And I had listened, smiling, encouraging, believing that was what good wives did. I cooked, nurtured, reassured, poured softness into every crack he created. In hindsight, I wasn't a partner. I was padding. Something to hold his ego upright. He zipped the suitcase with a dramatic flourish, as if expecting applause for his courage. I'm going to stay with Mason for a few days, he said. Think about whether this relationship still aligns with my goals. Goals. Everything was a performance review to him. Instead of pleading, I rose to my feet. The floor felt cold, steadying. I see. That startled him. He had prepared himself for tears, accusations, bargaining. Confident men crumble when the script changes. Before you go, I said softly, there's something you need to hear. He frowned. Lorraine, not now. But I wasn't asking permission. For 3 years, while he told people I did some consulting from home, I had been running a covert branch of crisis negotiation for corporate catastrophes, leadership corruption, data violations, imploding partnerships, lawsuits waiting to detonate. I handled the chaos nobody else had the stomach for. And 3 days earlier, my firm had been acquired for a sum that still felt unreal in my hands. I leveled my gaze with his. My company was acquired this week. My personal share is over 13 million. The room didn't move. Dust hung suspended in the slanted morning light. Even the birds outside seemed to stop singing. Rylan's brows knit, lifting into disbelief. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? You don't have a company, he stammered. You have clients, sure, but not a company worth anything. And you certainly don't have that. That, I repeated, is what happens when a woman builds in silence because the man she lives with only values noise. He blinked like someone trying to wake from a nightmare. You hid this from me? You never asked, I said. For years, you never once asked what I was building. You just assumed everything about me. He opened his mouth, closed it again, the muscles in his jaw twitching. You should have told me. Why? I asked. So you could shrink it? So you could resent it? So your friends could dissect it? I protected my work because it was the one part of my life you couldn't measure against yourself. He stepped back as if I had slapped him. Maybe I had, in a way. I walked to the dresser, pulled out a navy sweater, and slid into it with calm I didn't feel. The mortgage is in my name, I continued. The car, too. The savings account you think we share? I funded almost all of it. He stared, pale and rattled. I didn't know. No, I said, meeting his eyes, you never tried to. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence buzzed, charged with 7 years of unasked questions and unspoken truths. Then he whispered, so, what now? What now? As if this was simply a disagreement. As if the marriage wasn't already ashes. You said you needed space, I replied. So take it. But not here. I'll have the locks changed this afternoon. Lorraine, go, I said, voice low but finally, gloriously unshakable. You wanted to see whether you can do better. Now you can see whether you can stand on your own. His hand tightened around the suitcase handle until his knuckles whitened. He walked out the door without another word. When the house finally stilled, when his car backed down the driveway and disappeared around the corner, I expected to collapse. Instead, I felt taller, lighter, almost reborn. For the first time in decades, there was no weight keeping my shoulders hunched, no voice shrinking me to fit inside its comfort. I walked to the window, breathed in the cool morning air, and realized something that made my eyes sting, not from sadness, but from a fierce, dawning truth. I had spent so many years making myself small that he mistook it for my nature, but shrinking was never who I was. It was simply who I allowed myself to be, and that version of me, she was gone forever. The hours after Rylan left felt strangely hollow, like someone had scooped out the center of my life and left the shell behind. Yet the more I breathed, the more I realized that emptiness wasn't grief, it was space. Space I had been starving for. Space I didn't recognize because I had never allowed myself to inhabit it. I wrapped my hands around a warm mug of coffee, leaned against the counter, and let the truth settle. He didn't leave because he was unhappy. He left because he believed he deserved more. He believed he deserved someone shinier, louder, easier to parade, and that belief had not appeared overnight. I had planted it, watered it, fed it with my silence for years. I walked to my office, a small, quiet corner of the house he rarely entered. Not because he respected the space. Because he simply didn't care enough to be curious. In his mind, my work was something soft, flexible, secondary. Something women did to pass the time between laundry loads and dinner prep. If only he had known how many corporate fires I had extinguished from this very chair. If only he had noticed the way my phone vibrated at all hours with executives begging for guidance. If only he had seen me crafting statements that shifted public opinion, averting lawsuits worth millions. But he never looked long enough. I sat down and opened a drawer. There it was, my hidden timeline of sacrifice, printed neatly, tucked away like an artifact from a life I no longer recognized. Not for proof. For memory. Because women like me learn to keep receipts even when we pretend we don't. The first page was from 8 years earlier, the year Rylan's architectural career had stalled, the year I had stepped in quietly, anonymously, willingly. I remembered it with uncomfortable clarity. He had been sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands, saying his portfolio wasn't competitive, too simple, too safe. He said he needed better equipment, better exposure, better everything. I didn't hesitate. I transferred the money by afternoon. When the package arrived, a high-end camera that cost more than my first car, he hugged me with a kind of grateful desperation that made me believe I was doing the right thing. I realize now that it wasn't gratitude. It was dependency disguised as affection. Each page in that drawer carried its own sting. The website redesign I'd paid for, the professional associations, the travel expenses for networking conferences, the apartment down payment, the months of rent during his unemployment stretch, the dinners with potential clients he didn't want to admit he couldn't afford. I flipped through each sheet slowly, like turning the pages of a book I was finally willing to finish. For 7 years, I had carried the weight of our life with both hands while pretending it was light enough for him to lift. I had done it out of love, but also out of fear that if he ever realized how capable I truly was, he would feel inadequate, and inadequacy in men often becomes resentment. So I dimmed myself, softened every edge, smothered every spark, and handed him the illusion that he was leading a life he did not build. But the universe has a way of unraveling illusions when they have overstayed their welcome. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A message from Camille, my business partner, my anchor, the only person who truly knew what I carried. You good? He gone? Want me to come over? I stared at the screen, feeling a rush of affection for the woman who had walked beside me when nobody else noticed I existed. Come over, I typed. 20 minutes later, she was standing at my doorway with grocery bags, iced tea, and a look that said she already knew the answer to every question she hadn't yet asked. So, she said, shutting the door behind her, you told him. I did. And he packed his suitcase anyway. She let out a long whistle. The arrogance of that man could power the entire West Coast grid. Despite myself, I laughed. A real laugh. The first since before dawn. We settled on the couch, sunlight spilling through the blinds, warming our legs. Camille listened while I told her every detail, his words, his tone, the suitcase, the accusation that I lacked ambition. She didn't interrupt. She never did. She waited until I finished, then rested her hand on mine. Lorraine, she said softly, you have spent years hiding your brilliance to protect a man who never cared enough to look for it. You didn't lose a marriage today. You peeled off a mask you should have never been wearing. The truth of that sentence settled inside me like a seed finally finding soil. I thought making myself small was an act of love, I whispered. No, she replied, shrinking is something women do when the world teaches us that our glow is dangerous. I stared at her, throat tightening. Do you think I'm finally done shrinking? She smiled. You didn't shrink this morning. You ignited. I leaned back, letting the weight of the past shift through me. Tiredness hit me suddenly, heavy, bone-deep exhaustion from years of emotional labor. But beneath it lay something else. Something warmer. Something sharp and steady and growing power, not the loud, demanding kind men chase, the quiet, grounded kind women cultivate, the kind that doesn't need permission. By early afternoon, Camille left for a meeting, promising to check in later. When the door clicked shut behind her, I walked to the living room window. The sunlight looked different now, less harsh, more honest. The street outside was ordinary, children biking, a mail truck sputtering by, neighbors carrying groceries, but I felt like a different woman watching it. A woman finally willing to see her life clearly. I whispered into the empty room, he never asked who I was. And for the first time in my 54 years, I answered myself, but now I finally do. My phone buzzed again, Rylan, calling this time, but I pressed ignore. My silence was not pettiness. It was reclamation. The next chapter of my life wasn't waiting for him. It was waiting for me, and I was finally ready to walk toward it. After Camille left, the house grew strangely quiet, too quiet, as if the walls themselves were trying to process everything I had said out loud for the first time. I stood in the center of the living room, feeling the thick stillness settle around me, heavier than any silence I had endured during my marriage. It wasn't oppressive. It was revealing, the way a mirror shows you the face you've been avoiding. I walked slowly to my office again, not because I needed to work, but because that little corner of the house felt like the only place where I had ever been fully myself. For years, it had been my sanctuary. My battleground. My secret universe where I fixed the messes of powerful people who would crumble if the world saw what they truly were. Funny how that made me the invisible one. My laptop sat on the desk, half open, still glowing from the morning's chaos. I sank into the chair, the cushion shaped perfectly to my body from years of late nights and early strategy calls. It felt like slipping into my true skin. The inbox showed dozens of unread messages, clients, attorneys, executives who had heard about the acquisition through channels that never slept, but one message stood out, a news alert, a headline I knew would change everything. Confidential acquisition rumors surround Vail strategic negotiation firm rumors, not confirmation, but close, too close. My breath caught as I clicked it open. The article mentioned a female-led crisis consultancy, described as mysteriously effective, with possible ties to larger corporate networks. No names. No details. Nothing concrete, but journalists are vultures. When they sense a story with teeth, they circle closer every hour. My jaw tightened. The illusion of invisibility was already dissolving. I leaned back, letting the leather creak beneath me. My fingers tapped against the armrest as memories surfaced, memories of how this entire venture began long before Rylan ever doubted me. It was 8 years earlier. I had just turned 46. I was juggling freelance mediation cases while caring for my aging mother, while Rylan pursued passion projects that brought in little more than praise from his friends. Then Camille called one night. Her voice had been urgent, trembling but determined. I need you, she had said. A tech firm is drowning in legal backlash, and nobody will take the case. They need someone who understands how people implode when they're under pressure. Someone who can talk down monsters. I had swallowed hard. Why me? Because I've seen you do it, she said. You make chaos obey. You see through people. You read consequences before anyone else can. I had showed up the next morning and walked into a conference room full of terrified men in expensive suits. The company was on the brink of collapse after mishandling millions of user records. They expected me to soften the truth. Instead, I told them exactly how bad the situation was, what consequences would follow, and how to survive the fallout. They didn't argue, they listened, and then they paid. From that single case, word spread quietly among executives who preferred problems solved discreetly. For 3 full years, Camille and I built something powerful, profitable, and intentionally invisible. The less the public knew about us, the more companies trusted us, but invisibility came with unexpected consequences. People like Rylan mistook silence for absence. He mistook modesty for mediocrity. He mistook my gentleness for weakness. I opened the folder labeled Foundations, the beginning of everything Camille and I had built. Case files, strategy frameworks, crisis mapping models, all the tools that gave us leverage over men who were terrified of losing their empires. Looking at it laid out so neatly, a wave of anger rose in me, not fiery, not violent, but cold and dignified. A refined anger that tasted like truth. How had I ever allowed myself to dim this? How had I ever believed that a man's comfort was more important than my own brilliance? My phone buzzed. The text from Camille: board meeting moved to Friday afternoon. Investors want final signatures. Be ready. I exhaled slowly. The acquisition was becoming real in a way I hadn't fully absorbed until now. Once those documents were signed, my life would no longer fit inside the shape of the person I used to be. The world would know my name. My work. My capability. Visibility terrified me, because visibility meant scrutiny, exposure, expectation. But invisibility had cost me far more. I closed my laptop and wandered to the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me looked older than she had that morning, yet sharper, like a blade freshly pulled from the fire. My hair was messy from stress. My sweater hung loosely off one shoulder. My eyes were red from hours of holding emotions I hadn't named yet. But beneath the exhaustion was something startling: presence, real presence, the kind I had caged for years. A knock startled me. Not loud. Not urgent. A timid staccato, like someone apologizing with their knuckles. I froze, then the doorbell rang. My breath caught as a possibility hit me. Rylan, coming back, wanting to talk, wanting to rewrite the morning. I stepped toward the door, heart steady, not nervous. Whatever waited on the other side, I was not the woman who woke up today, but when I opened it, a different face stood there, my neighbor, Paula, 2 houses down. She was in her 60s, warm-eyed, always in floral scarves. Hi sweetheart, she said gently. I saw him leave with a suitcase earlier. Wanted to check if you're alright. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Not because I needed comfort, but because women like her, women who've lived whole lifetimes, can see through you in seconds. I'm okay, I whispered. She nodded, studying me in that quiet, almost motherly way. You look like a woman who's about to become herself, she said. The words struck so deeply I had to blink away the sudden burn behind my eyes. She squeezed my arm. If you ever need anything, company, wine, someone to laugh with, I'm here. I thanked her, closed the door, and leaned against it, exhaling shakily. A woman becoming herself. The phrase echoed through me like a vow. I walked back into the house and looked around, not at what had been lost, but at what could finally be built. I was done hiding, done shrinking, done waiting for someone else to validate my worth. The next chapter would not be written in whispers, it would be written in my full voice. And I was finally ready to hear it. The next morning, I woke before the sun, long before the sky remembered how to turn blue. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't heartbroken. I felt strangely alert, as if my entire life had been building toward this single day, and every nerve in my body finally understood its assignment. I brewed coffee, the aroma rising like courage, and walked through the house with bare feet touching the cold floor. Each room carried echoes of a life I had outgrown. The tidy living room. The silent dining table. The photographs of a marriage that looked stable from a distance but was hollow up close. Today I wasn't dwelling on any of it. Today I was planning. Rylan's birthday dinner was 3 days away, an event I had scheduled months earlier at one of the most sought-after restaurants in the city, a place he always described as one-day material. One day, when he made enough. One day, when he was recognized. One day, when he finally stepped into greatness, irony has a wicked sense of timing. The one day he dreamt of was about to arrive, just not the way he imagined. I opened my planner, flipped to the reservation page, and stared at the carefully written details. A table for two. A quiet celebration. A romantic evening that used to mean something. But now, the reservation needed a transformation just as drastic as my life had undergone. I grabbed my phone and called the restaurant. A woman with a soft European accent answered, "This is Aurelia Dining. How may I assist you?" "Good morning," I said, my voice steadier than my heartbeat. "I'd like to modify an existing reservation under the name Lorraine Vale." She typed something in the background, keys clacking faintly. "Ah, yes. A dinner for two at 7 o'clock on Saturday. How can we adjust it?" "I need a private dining room," I said. "And seating for 12. The woman paused, then spoke with a quiet curiosity. 12, ma'am? For the same event?" "For the same event," I confirmed. She didn't ask why. "Professionals rarely do. I can accommodate that. Would you like the presentation equipment prepared as well?" I had forgotten she and I had spoken weeks ago when I first considered revealing the acquisition at this dinner. Back then, it was supposed to be a quiet, intimate announcement to my husband. Now it would be the stage for truth. "Yes," I said. "I'll need a screen, a projector, and laptop capability." "Of course. Everything will be ready." When the call ended, I felt an unexpected tremor in my hands, adrenaline, not doubt. Revenge wasn't the motivation. Exposure wasn't the goal. I wanted clarity. Illumination. A moment where nobody, especially Rylan, could pretend not to see me anymore. I opened my laptop and began building the presentation. Every slide was a confession I should have spoken years ago. Every chart charted the path of a life he never bothered to ask about. Every number was a testament to the woman he overlooked. By mid-morning, Camille arrived without knocking, carrying pastries and the kind of energy only she could bring into my home. "You look like a general preparing for war," she said, closing the door behind her. "This isn't war." "No," she smirked, setting down the bag. "This is you reclaiming sovereignty." She walked over to the dining table and scanned the open slides, the company timeline, the contracts, the acquisition summary, the discreet but undeniable proof of my worth. Camille crossed her arms. "He's going to shatter." "He already cracked," I said. "This will simply reveal the pieces." She sat across from me, her voice gentler. "What do you want from that night, Lorraine?" "Not for him, what do you want for you?" I breathed in deeply, letting the truth find its shape. "A clean ending," I said. "No more explanations. No more hoping he'll understand. I want to say everything once, clearly, and then walk away with the door closed." "For good?" "For good." Camille reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then we'll make sure the message lands." The rest of the day passed in focused quiet. I reviewed documents, selected each slide with meticulous care, and crafted the exact words I would speak. It didn't feel like planning revenge. It felt like preparing a eulogy for the woman I used to be. Around noon, I printed the clean versions of the documents. The paper was crisp, smooth, heavy in my hands. Evidence of a life lived fully, silently, brilliantly. By afternoon, I was ready for the locksmith. He arrived in a worn denim jacket and measured politeness. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" "I need the locks changed." "Lost keys?" he asked. "No," I said simply. "New life." He nodded without judgment. Women find solidarity in the strangest places. After he finished, I held the new keys in my palm, small, metallic, cold. But they felt like liberation. Later that evening, I pulled out the midnight blue dress I had purchased for the dinner, planning originally to surprise Rylan with something elegant and understated. Now it symbolized something different. It wasn't meant for him anymore. It was designed for the woman I was becoming. I hung it near the mirror and studied the silhouette. Soft fabric, strong color. The quiet kind of power. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the house filled with warm orange light, and for the first time in years, I felt aligned with myself, unapologetically, fiercely aligned. The phone buzzed. A message from Rylan. We need to talk. Please. This is getting out of hand. Out of hand. No, this was the first time I had placed my life firmly into my own hands. I set the phone face down without replying. The night was so still I could hear my own breathing again, calm, centered, ready. 3 days from now, Truth would stand in a dining room filled with 12 witnesses. 3 days from now, Rylan would see the woman he chose to diminish. 3 days from now, I would speak the final words of a marriage that never deserved me, and I would not whisper them. I would not tremble. I would not shrink. I would deliver them with the clarity of a woman stepping into the exact size she was always meant to be. By the time Saturday arrived, the air carried a kind of electric sharpness, the kind that precedes a storm. My morning coffee tasted different, bolder, richer, almost defiant. Everything in my home seemed unusually crisp, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what was coming. I spent the early afternoon reviewing my presentation one final time. Not because I needed reassurance, I had rehearsed every syllable until the words fused with my bones, but because repetition steadied me. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the calm before you open a door that once terrified you. By late afternoon, I stood before the mirror wearing the midnight blue dress. The fabric hugged my shape in a way that felt intentional, like it was designed to armor my spirit. As I fastened my earrings, small diamonds inherited from my grandmother, I felt a presence beside me, a whisper of every woman in my lineage who once silenced herself so men could feel grand. Not anymore, I said softly to the mirror. Not tonight. I arrived at Aurelia Dining 20 minutes early. The golden sconces lining the entrance cast warm halos on the walkway, and the glass doors reflected the steady determination in my posture. Inside, the maitre d' recognized me instantly and bowed with the kind of respect rarely offered to women who had been underestimated their entire lives. Ms. Vale, he said, your room is prepared. The hallway leading to the private dining room was lined with black and white photographs of old European markets, women selling bread, women sorting flowers, women who looked tired yet unbreakable. It felt fitting. When we reached the private room, the lights glowed softly across a long polished table set for 12. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the ambient glow. Placed discreetly in the corner was the projection screen, already connected to the hidden control panel. This is perfect, I whispered. As I checked my laptop connection, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart didn't race, I wouldn't allow it. Instead, I inhaled slowly, straightened my spine, and walked toward the entrance. The first to arrive were Mason and Reed, two of Rylan's closest friends. They stepped inside with the exact energy I expected, curiosity laced with entitlement. Mason raised an eyebrow when he saw me standing alone. Lorraine, he said. We thought this was a surprise party. For Rylan. It is, I replied, just not for the reasons you think. They exchanged confused glances, but the maitre d' ushered them toward their seats before they could press further. Next came Kira, a co-worker of Rylan's, all stiff posture and career-polished confidence. She greeted me politely, masking judgment beneath a veneer of professionalism. I wasn't bothered. Tonight would rearrange her assumptions too. Then came two more friends. Then another. A cluster of people who had never looked at me closely enough to remember the color of my eyes. Now walking into my arena, they whispered to one another while taking their seats. Their confusion thickened the air like fog. They asked questions I didn't answer, and then, the room fell silent. Rylan stepped inside. He looked exhausted, wearing the charcoal gray jacket I'd bought him years earlier when I still believed in celebrating his milestones. His eyes sought mine with a desperation that should have moved me, but all it stirred was clarity. Lorraine, he said, voice strained. Why are they here? What is this? A dinner, I answered evenly. Your dinner. He stared at me, and I watched hope flicker across his face, hope that this was reconciliation, hope that I had softened, hope that he could speak his way back into my home. He had always mistaken my silence for forgiveness. Not tonight, please, I said, extending a hand toward the table. Have a seat. The guests quieted, sensing a tension they could no longer pretend to ignore. Rylan hesitated, then walked to the chair directly across from me. His hands trembled as he settled into the seat. Once everyone sat, I stood, and the room inhaled. "Thank you all for being here," I began, letting my voice fill the space with calm control. "This evening has a purpose. A simple one." Eyes widened. Whispering stopped. The room stilled. "2 days ago," I continued, "Rylan told me that his friends," I glanced at the table, "believed he deserved someone more impressive. Someone more ambitious. Someone more remarkable." The shame that swept across their faces was almost palpable. "I thought," I said, gesturing toward the screen, "you should understand exactly who I am before deciding what I'm not." I connected my laptop to the projector. The first slide appeared, my firm's emblem, bold and minimalist. Gasps murmured around the room. "For 3 years, I have co-owned a crisis negotiation agency specializing in high-level corporate disasters," I said. "The kinds of problems the public never hears about. Because I fix them." I advanced the slide. Revenue charts, case summaries, confidential achievements wrapped in careful language. "I did all of this from the office down the hall," I continued. "Quietly. Effectively. While every one of you assumed I spent my days dabbling in background work." Ryland sank lower in his chair, his face drained of color. "I kept going. These," I said, displaying the acquisition documents, "are the numbers from the corporate purchase finalized last week. My personal share now exceeds 13 million. One person gasped audibly. Another lowered her head. Someone else cleared his throat, attempting to mask shock. Then I clicked to the final slide. Not finances, not accolades, evidence, financial transfers, rent payments, career expenses, membership fees, all the invisible support Rylan believed appeared magically. While Rylan was building his reputation, I said softly, I was financing the life he claimed to have built himself. The silence was suffocating, heavy, undeniable. For the first time all evening, I looked directly at Rylan. "You said I didn't push you to grow," I whispered. "But I carried you while you convinced yourself you were flying." He swallowed hard. "Lorraine. I didn't know." "No," I answered, "you never wanted to." I closed my laptop, the screen went dark and the truth settled like dust in the room. "This dinner," I said, "is not retaliation. It is closure. I am no longer shrinking. I am no longer invisible. And I am no longer yours." When I stepped back, the room remained frozen, 12 witnesses forced to confront their own assumptions. I lifted my glass. "To clarity," I said. "The kind we should never apologize for." And with that, I ended the last chapter of my marriage, not with anger, not with tears, but with truth so clear it could never again be ignored. The moment my glass touched the table, the room seemed to stop breathing. It wasn't the dramatic gasp of people witnessing chaos. It was the stunned, paralyzing quiet of people realizing they had completely misread an entire human being. The truth didn't explode. It seeped. It crawled. It filled every corner of that elegant dining room until no one could pretend to ignore it. Ryland's eyes were fixed on the blank projection screen, as if staring long enough might erase the words he had just heard. Mason shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Reed avoided my gaze entirely. Kira looked as if someone had slammed a door inside her chest. The only sound was the soft hum of the overhead lights. Then a waiter appeared with impeccable timing, rolling a silver cart carrying the first course. But when he saw the tension, the way the air felt thick enough to swallow, his smile faltered. "Shall I begin presenting the dishes?" he asked tentatively. "Yes," I answered calmly. "The evening will continue. Because this wasn't a spectacle. It was a statement, and statements aren't abandoned halfway." He nodded and described the dish, his voice trembling slightly. Nobody reached for their fork. Nobody breathed deeply. They sat frozen, holding their shame like a fragile, burning glass orb. Finally, Mason exhaled a slow, uneven breath. "Lorraine, why didn't you tell us any of this?" I studied him for a moment. He truly didn't understand. "Not yet, you never asked," I said. "You saw what you wanted to see. A quiet woman. A stable presence. Someone you could measure against your own ambition and feel superior." Ryland flinched as if I'd struck him, not harshly, but honestly. "Truth often hurts more than cruelty ever could." Reed cleared his throat. "I didn't think. I mean, I guess we assumed." "Yes," I said. "You assumed. Because it was easier than being curious." Kira spoke next, her voice oddly fragile for someone who once radiated unstoppable confidence. Rylan never mentioned your work. He always just said you consulted. He never highlighted anything. I smiled, but it wasn't warm. He didn't highlight it because he didn't know it existed. Her eyes widened. He didn't know? No, I said, letting the word settle. Not because I hid it poorly. Not because I tried to deceive him. But because he never asked what I did, what I built, or who I was. I was background lighting in his life. Useful. Unnoticed. The waiter returned with the second course. Again, nobody touched their food. Rylan finally lifted his head. His voice barely carried across the table. Lorraine. I made mistakes. I didn't realize. I never thought. That's the problem, I interrupted softly. You never thought. Not about me. Not about my dreams. You never asked what made me proud, what kept me awake at night, what I feared, what I aspired to. You asked for dinners, comfort, stability. You never asked for my truth. He pressed his hands together, elbows on the table, like a man desperately searching for answers in a prayer he didn't believe in. I could have supported you, he whispered. You couldn't support something you refused to see. A murmur rippled through the room. Everyone's shoulders curled inward, as if trying to disappear. They looked guilty, but guilt without accountability is just another form of vanity. The third course arrived, beautiful, fragrant, meticulous, but untouched. The waiter placed each plate gently, trying to pretend the emotional wreckage around him didn't exist, and then the cracks finally showed. Kira leaned forward, voice trembling. Rylan, you told us she didn't have ambition. You told us she didn't understand your pressure. You told us she wanted a simple life. I watched him shrink, inch by inch. He couldn't hide behind charm here. He couldn't mask insecurity behind loud confidence. He was exposed, stripped down to the bone. She never, he began, but the sentence died. I finished it for him. I never contradicted you. Because you never gave me a place to speak. You never created space for my life to exist beside yours. He closed his eyes. A crack ran through him. A slow, painful fracture. Mason suddenly pushed away from the table, rubbing his forehead. Rylan, man, this is bad. You told us she depended on you. I lifted my remaining documents. I paid for 8 months of rent during his unemployment, I said. I financed 2 major career investments. I covered all travel during his early architectural conferences. And I never mentioned a word. None of them spoke, none could. Why didn't you tell him? Reed whispered, genuinely bewildered. I paused. This was the deepest truth. Because I loved him, I said. And I believed love meant making yourself small so the other person never felt inadequate. The silence that followed felt like a verdict neither side could appeal. Finally, Rylan pushed his plate away. His voice was barely audible. Are you leaving me? I already did, I said. The moment you packed that suitcase and walked out because someone else convinced you I wasn't worthy. He swallowed hard. I was wrong. Yes, I agreed. And I refused to spend the rest of my life hoping you correct that mistake. The waiter brought dessert, delicate pastries drizzled with golden sugar. I stood. This dinner, I said, is my last act of generosity. A final meal shared with the version of you that believed I was forgettable. After tonight, you will never again shape the way I see myself. Every face around the table reflected the same understanding. The marriage was already a corpse. Tonight simply provided the gravestone. I lifted my glass one final time. To truth, I said. And to women who finally remember their own magnitude. I took a single sip, placed the glass down, and turned to leave. Behind me, the room erupted, voices tangled in guilt, disbelief, regret. Rylan's chair scraped loudly against the marble floor as he stood, but I didn't look back. Women who reclaim themselves never walk backward. I stepped through the doorway and felt the air outside hit my lungs like freedom. The night was waiting. My future was waiting, and for the first time in decades, I was the only one writing the next page. The air outside the restaurant was crisp, almost sharp, the kind of cold that wakes every dormant nerve. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, it felt like stepping out of a different version of myself. A heavier woman stayed behind in that private dining room, the woman who had carried silence like a second skin, who had whispered her worth instead of speaking it, I walked toward my car with steady steps. No trembling. No second-guessing. Just the clean, startling truth. I had finally ended something that should have ended years ago. The street was alive with weekend chatter, couples laughing, taxis rushing past, a musician strumming a soft melody near the corner. None of them knew the seismic shift that had just unfolded inside the walls behind me. None of them knew a woman had just taken her life back molecule by molecule. When I unlocked my car door, I paused, taking one last look at the restaurant's glowing windows. Even from a distance, I could see shadows moving, chaotic gestures, frantic whispers, people trying to piece together the wreckage of illusions that had just been stripped away. I didn't envy them. I slid into the driver's seat and rested my hands on the steering wheel. I expected tears. Relief. Rage. Something large and consuming. Instead, there was only stillness. The stillness so unfamiliar it almost frightened me. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing you were never afraid of the fall, only afraid of stepping away from the ground you'd been told to worship. I drove home on autopilot, the city lights blurring into soft ribbons of gold. The house greeted me in silence, the kind that used to feel lonely but now felt like liberation. I set down my purse, kicked off my heels, and curled up on the couch, staring at the dark window pane that reflected a woman I was only beginning to recognize. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Texts. Calls. Notifications from Rylan, from people at the dinner, from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. Hours slipped by without shape. I must have drifted into a restless sleep because the next thing I felt was the sudden pulse of my phone vibrating violently against the coffee table. I blinked awake, disoriented, and reached for it. The screen glowed with an unknown number. The clock read 4:17 a.m. A bad hour. A trembling hour. The hour where truth often calls because lies fall asleep. I answered. A breathless, broken voice spilled through the speaker. Lorraine? Please don't hang up. It's me. Kira. Kira, the colleague who had once looked at me like I was a quiet, harmless accessory to Rylan's life. The same woman who sat at that dinner table hours earlier, stunned into silence. What happened? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She inhaled shakily. Everything blew up after you left. Her voice broke. They were yelling at him. Really yelling. Mason demanded explanations. Reed kept asking how he could talk about you the way he had when he didn't even know you. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me with a strange mixture of sadness and inevitability. Rylan tried to spin it, she continued, but... Lorraine, nobody bought it. Not after what you showed. Not after seeing him crumble like that. I waited, listening to the sound of her breathing, hearing the guilt in every inhale. I didn't call to gossip, she said finally. I called because I owe you an apology. A real one. I judged you without ever trying to understand you. I repeated things he said about you. I assumed quiet meant unimpressive. You didn't deserve that. Her honesty was sharp, cutting in a clean way. People see what they want to see, I replied gently. He wanted a wife who stayed in the background. You saw what he framed. But I should have known better, she whispered. You didn't deserve that narrative. None of it. For a moment, I didn't speak, because somewhere beneath her confession was a deeper question she was too ashamed to ask. Why are you really calling, Kira? Silence stretched, trembling. Then, because he fell apart, she said. Right outside the restaurant. He tried to walk away, but Mason grabbed his arm. And when they asked, point blank, if he had ever asked about your work, he just froze. I could picture it clearly, the sidewalk under the street lamp, the cluster of men facing him, the truth he never bothered to seek finally unraveling him. What did he say? I asked. He said nothing, she whispered. Nothing at all. That was the closest thing the universe ever gives us to justice. And when they pressed him, she continued, when they asked why he said you held him back, she exhaled shakily. He broke. Really broke. Started crying in front of all of us. Saying he didn't know, didn't think, didn't realize. A soft ache pulled at my chest, not for him, but for the years I had wasted hoping he would someday think deeper than his own reflection. Kira, I said, you didn't call at 4 in the morning just to apologize. No, she confessed. Her voice cracked. I called because I needed to know something. I needed to ask you directly. Ask me what? If there's any chance, she whispered, that you might forgive him. Or, try again. The question hung in the air like a fragile thread. I rose from the couch and walked to the window. The city outside was quiet, bathed in the soft blue glow of early dawn. Delivery trucks rumbled in the distance. A solitary runner passed by, breath fogging in the air. The world was beginning its morning while mine had transformed in the night. No, I said finally. There is no chance. But what if he learns from this? What if he didn't change? I said softly. He got exposed. There's a difference. She didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Kira, I said, my tone firm but not unkind, I don't hate any of you. I'm just done letting the wrong people define my worth. Can I call you again? She asked. No, I answered. Not anymore. Before she could speak, I ended the call. I set the phone down, feeling a quiet, steady certainty settle deep inside me. I wasn't angry, I wasn't wounded, I wasn't fragile. I was awake. The sun was beginning to rise, brushing the city with a golden warmth. I curled up on the couch, pulled a blanket over myself, and let myself drift into a peaceful sleep, the first I'd had in years. A woman who stops shrinking becomes someone the world can no longer ignore. And finally, that woman was me. When I finally woke, sunlight spilled across the living room like a quiet blessing, warm and unapologetic. For a moment, I lay still, eyes half open, feeling the strange weightlessness of a woman no longer carrying someone else's expectations. The house felt different. Lighter. As if my walls had exhaled during the night. But the moment I picked up my phone, the illusion shattered. Dozens of missed calls, dozens of texts, hundreds of notifications blinking like alarms. The world had found me. Before fear could settle, a headline appeared on my lock screen. The hidden architect behind corporate salvations. Who exactly is Lorraine Vale? My stomach tightened, not with dread, but with inevitability. Visibility was no longer a choice. It was the price of stepping into my own power. I opened social media. My name was everywhere. Articles. Rumors. Threads unraveling the mystery of the woman who had confronted her husband at his own celebration, then walked away like a queen abandoning a sinking ship she had once tried to save. Some praised me, some doubted me, some wanted details, some wanted blood. I made coffee, hand steady despite the chaos unfolding at my fingertips. This was what happens when truth meets a hungry world. They devour it in portions too large to swallow. Just as I sat down, another notification flashed. Camille, I'm coming over. Urgent. 5 minutes later, she burst in, hair pulled back, coat half-buttoned, laptop under her arm. Oh my God, she said, breathless. The story exploded. Reporters are circling your name like vultures. Investors are watching. Clients are panicking. And journalists have already traced the acquisition rumor to us. I nodded slowly. I saw. She set her laptop on the counter and opened several tabs. My face appeared again and again, sometimes flattering, sometimes malicious, always dissected. You're trending everywhere, she said. A viral wildfire. I sipped my coffee. Let them burn. She paused, studying my expression. You're not shaken. No, I admitted. Not anymore. Because once you walk through fire, a few sparks can't hurt you. Camille sat beside me. There's more, she said. After you left last night, someone recorded the aftermath outside the restaurant. My pulse sharpened. Recorded? Yes. It's already online. People are reposting it nonstop. She opened the video. The shaky camera captured Rylan stumbling onto the sidewalk, Mason confronting him. Reed's face twisted with disbelief, Kira wiping tears, Rylan shouting that he didn't know, that she hid everything, that it wasn't fair. And then, the line that sealed his fate. Mason's voice, cold and merciless. Did you ever ask her? Even once? Rylan had frozen. The camera zoomed in on his silence. That silence spread across the internet like a confession. When the clip ended, Camille closed the laptop and turned to me. that single moment, she said, made the world choose its side. People aren't calling you a villain anymore. They're calling you a symbol. I swallowed slowly, letting the truth settle. A symbol. I hadn't asked to be one, I hadn't planned to be one. But women don't choose the moments that liberate us, they choose us. Before Camille could continue, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown sender, you deserve so much more than he ever gave you. And another, thank you for showing women like me that silence isn't loyalty. Then another, your story saved me tonight. Each message struck with different weight, gratitude, sorrow, solidarity. I felt them gather around my heart like an invisible sisterhood. But then Camille's expression shifted. There's something else, she said quietly. You should prepare yourself. I raised an eyebrow. For what? She hesitated. A journalist contacted Rylan early this morning. He gave a statement. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with annoyance. What did he say? She pulled up the article. I braced myself. My wife deceived me, he claimed. She kept secrets. She humiliated me. She weaponized her success. I was blindsided. Camille scoffed. Blindsided? He didn't even know what question to ask. I felt the anger rise, not explosive, but steady and controlled. A fire with a clear purpose. He's trying to reclaim the narrative, I said. Of course he is, she replied. Men like him don't lose quietly. I leaned back against the couch, letting the truth settle. He wasn't fighting for our marriage. He was fighting for his image. He always had been. What do you want to do? Camille asked. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. Nothing, I said. Let him talk. Words don't make him right. She studied me with something like admiration. You've changed. I smiled faintly. No. I've surfaced. She nodded, understanding more than most ever could. As she packed up to leave, promising to handle investors and coordinate a unified statement, I walked to the window. The city stretched beneath me in a mosaic of light and motion. Somewhere out there, Rylan was probably unraveling, scrambling to rebuild a reputation he had always valued more than truth. My phone buzzed again. An email from Rylan. Subject, please read this. I opened it. His message was long, rambling, full of half apologies and excuses. He said he was humiliated. He said he felt betrayed. He said he deserved clarity. He said the marriage deserved another chance. He said everything except the one thing that mattered. I finally see you. When I finished reading, I deleted it, not out of cruelty, but out of closure. Some doors shouldn't remain cracked, they need to be sealed. That night, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the city hum with life. The world was shifting around me, pulling me into a spotlight I never intended to stand under. But I wasn't afraid. I felt anchored, present, more myself than I had ever been, and somewhere deep inside, a truth pulsed like a heartbeat. Visibility isn't dangerous. What's dangerous is spending a life hiding beside someone who never bothered to look. During the weeks that followed, my life transformed into something unrecognizable. Not glamorous. Not chaotic. More like a spotlight I had never asked for but could no longer step out of. Every morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing with emails, interview requests, invitations to speak, and messages from strangers who felt connected to a story they had only glimpsed from afar. The strangest part, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt awake, like someone had tilted the axis of my life, and I was finally standing upright. One crisp Monday morning, I sat in the new office Camille and I had leased, a space filled with sunlight, glass walls, and a view of the city that felt almost poetic. The carpet was soft under my heels, the desk solid beneath my palms, and the hum of our growing team vibrated through the walls like a heartbeat. For years, I had built this life quietly. Now that I was visible, people acted as if it had bloomed overnight. Camille burst through the door, her blazer slightly wrinkled, dark hair pulled into a loose knot. You're everywhere, she said, collapsing into the chair across from me. Every news site. Every business platform. Even the lifestyle magazines want a piece of you. I exhaled slowly. I didn't realize stepping into my own truth would be treated like breaking news. She smirked. Women reclaiming themselves is always breaking news. I leaned back and let her words sink in. Do you think it will die down? I asked. No, she said. And that's a good thing. The truth was, part of me craved the quiet again. Not invisibility, just stillness. But visibility had its purpose. It forced me to stop shrinking. It forced others to stop assuming. It forced Rylan to confront a version of me he had never bothered to know. Any updates on him? Camille asked carefully. I stared out the window before answering. Cars crawled along the freeway like metallic beetles, tiny and distant. He gave another interview yesterday, I said. Claimed I built my career in secret to manipulate him. She scoffed. Manipulate? That man couldn't see past his own reflection. I didn't argue. It wasn't worth the breath. What about you? She asked. How do you feel reading all that? I thought for a long moment. Like he's grieving an image he invented, not the woman he married. I don't think he ever knew me well enough to grieve me. Camille's eyes softened. That's what hurts the most sometimes, not the betrayal itself, but the realization they never truly saw you. Her words felt like a hand pressed gently against an old bruise. Before we could continue, my assistant knocked. Ms. Vale, she said, your keynote video hit over 1 million views overnight. My stomach flipped, not from fear, but from something closer to a million people, a million hearts, a million women hearing a story that mirrored pieces of their own. Send me the link, I said. When she left, Camille raised an eyebrow. Ready to watch yourself go viral? Not really, I admitted. But apparently I'm outvoted. I opened the video. There I was on stage, standing confidently, speaking about invisibility as a survival tactic, about shrinking in spaces that demanded women be small, about finally stepping into the truth of your own worth. The audience was silent in the recording, not empty, but hushed with reverence. When I finished, they rose, clapping so loudly it rattled the camera. Watching myself felt surreal. For years, I had been the woman who sat at dinner parties listening rather than speaking. Now I was the woman people listened to with fierce attention. When the video ended, Camille leaned forward. You're not just visible now. You're needed. Her words hit deeper than I expected. Later that afternoon, I slipped away to a quiet meeting room with floor-to-ceiling windows. The sunlight washed across the table, warming my skin. I needed a moment to breathe, alone, without the weight of everyone's expectations. My phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but something urged me to answer. Hello? I said cautiously. A fragile pause, then a woman's voice, soft, trembling. Is this Lorraine? Lorraine Vale? Yes, I said. I hope I'm not intruding. I needed to tell you something. I watched your keynote today. I'm 61. Married for 37 years. And I realized I've spent most of that time disappearing. My heart clenched. She continued. When you said shrinking isn't love, something inside me cracked. I didn't know I could choose myself at this age. Her voice wavered with the weight of decades. You choosing yourself, I said gently, might be the bravest choice you ever make. She cried softly. Not the devastated kind, more like relief finally given permission to breathe. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time, letting her words settle. The world wasn't responding to my story because it was dramatic. They were responding because it was familiar, too familiar. By early evening, after several meetings, I returned home exhausted but fulfilled. I kicked off my heels, loosened my hair, and let myself collapse on the couch. The house felt safe again, mine, wholly mine. Just as I was sinking into the cushions, my phone buzzed. An email from Ryland. Subject, closure? I stared at it without opening it, then deleted it. I didn't need closure from a man who had never offered clarity. I had already closed that chapter myself. Later that night, as the city glowed outside my window, I sat with a cup of chamomile tea and let gratitude wash over me, not for the pain, not for the betrayal, but for surviving both, for stepping into visibility, for refusing to shrink again. For becoming a lighthouse instead of a shadow. And somewhere deep in my chest, I felt a new certainty. Taking root, strong, solid, unstoppable. My life wasn't rebuilding. It was expanding, not because of attention, not because of revenge, but because I had finally remembered who I was, and the world, astonishingly, had remembered with me. 3 months after the night I walked out of Aurelia Dining, I found myself standing at the window of my new apartment, watching the city shimmer in the early evening light. The sky stretched wide and honey-colored, glowing with the soft promise of winter. From this height, the world looked alive, constantly shifting, unapologetically bold, refusing to stay still for anyone. I understood that energy now. I finally matched it. The apartment was mine entirely, furnished with pieces I chose because they felt like me, not because they matched someone else's preferences. Deep navy velvet chairs. Soft cream rugs. Shelves lined with books I had been too busy to read during the years I spent shrinking myself. My phone vibrated. A message from Camille. Thai food in the mission? 30 minutes? I replied instantly, yes. It struck me how different my life felt now. No tension. No waiting for approval. No navigating the fragile ego of a man who only saw himself. Just breathing. A full life built around purpose, not apology. Before leaving, I sat for a moment on the edge of the bed, letting my thoughts drift back over the whirlwind that had carried me here. The acquisition. The public attention. The women who had reached out with stories that mirror the quiet suffering I once lived. The way my name had somehow become a symbol for women reclaiming themselves after decades of being overlooked. I wasn't grateful for the pain, but I was grateful for what I became because of it, and I realized something important. Growth rarely happens in comfort. It happens in the ruptured, in the tearing, in the moment when you decide your silence costs too much. The decision to finally see myself had changed everything. My calendar today looked nothing like it did before. Meetings with international clients. Interviews with publications I once read from the sidelines. Invitations to speak at events where women of all ages gathered to learn how to negotiate with power, not fear. My team had grown to nearly 50 employees across state lines. Camille and I hired analysts, strategists, legal advisors, digital architects. A company we once built in secrecy had become something expansive, visible, respected, all because I stopped letting my own brilliance scare me. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The December air was crisp, the city glittered like a sea of warm stars. As I walked toward the corner where Camille would pick me up, I felt a wash of gratitude, unexpected, overwhelming, grounding. Halfway down the block, a young woman approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Lorraine Vale?" I nodded, her eyes softened with something tender, almost reverent. "I watched your keynote in Austin," she said. "It changed my life." My breath caught. Even now, hearing those words felt surreal. She continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm 57. I've spent decades holding myself back so my husband could shine. But after hearing you speak, I realized I can step into my own light too." I touched her arm gently. "You deserve to take up space," I said. "Your dreams didn't expire just because time passed." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you for saying it out loud so women like me could finally hear it." She squeezed my hand before walking away, and I stood frozen for a moment, humbled, moved, changed. That small exchange held more weight than any corporate acquisition. Because it proved what I had only begun to accept: when a woman stands in her truth, she doesn't rise alone, she creates a path for others to rise with her. Later that night, over steaming bowls of noodles at the bustling Thai place, Camille raised a glass to me, to the woman who finally stopped apologizing for being extraordinary. I laughed softly. I was never extraordinary. I just stopped hiding. "That," she said, "is exactly what makes you extraordinary." As we ate, the restaurant buzzed with life, laughter, clinking dishes, the hum of conversations that carried stories I would never hear. But I didn't feel invisible in the crowd like I once did. I felt present. Rooted. Fully alive. When I returned home, I didn't turn on the lights immediately. Instead, I stood by the window in the dark, watching car headlights weave through the night. My reflection stared back at me, faint but certain. For years, I believed shrinking myself was an act of love, but love should never demand your disappearance. Love should never require you to dim the brightest part of yourself. Love should be chosen, not performed, and the greatest act of love I ever gave myself was refusing to remain small. As I slipped off my coat, a thought pushed itself forward. Women over 50 often believe reinvention belongs to the young, but I am living proof that we become our truest selves later, not earlier. We become powerful when the world expects us to fade. We become remarkable the moment we stop waiting for permission. That is the lesson life refused to let me ignore, and if one woman hears it, if one woman chooses herself because she heard my story, then everything I endured was worth it. Before going to bed, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began writing new notes for my next speech. Not for fame. Not for applause. For the women who still whisper their dreams instead of declaring them. My message to them was simple: do not shrink to make someone else comfortable. Do not apologize for wanting more. Do not let anyone tell you that your worth is dependent on their vision, and above all, remember that your story isn't over just because someone else failed to recognize you. I closed my laptop, inhaled deeply, and whispered out loud, this is only the beginning. Then, like a promise to myself and to every woman still waiting to step into her light, I spoke directly to the imaginary camera of the audience I knew would one day hear my story. If this journey touched your heart, if it reminded you of your strength, hit that subscribe button, join this community, and walk with me. We're just getting started, and I promise, the next chapter will be even more powerful.